When people talk about the violence of the American frontier, they usually reach for easy archetypes: the outlaw, the lawman, the gunslinger who lived by the draw and died by it. But the real West was never that clean. It was shaped by men who lived in the cracks between law and chaos. Men whose actions were praised as justice by some and condemned as savagery by others. Few figures embody that contradiction more completely than Clay Allison. His name carried weight wherever it was spoken, sometimes fear, sometimes admiration, sometimes both at once. He was a Confederate veteran, a rancher, a vigilante, and a killer whose temper was as famous as his gun hand. Stories about him grew darker with each retelling, until truth and legend blurred into something larger and more unsettling than either alone. Before this story goes any further, take a moment and subscribe to Echoing Westwinds, so you don't miss these journeys into the most uncomfortable and forgotten corners of frontier history. Clay Allison was born in the hills of Tennessee in 1841 into a large, deeply religious family. His father was a Presbyterian minister who demanded discipline and obedience, and for a few early years, Clay's life followed a familiar rural rhythm of farming, livestock, and church. That stability shattered when his father died while Clay was still a child. The loss left a permanent mark. Those who knew him later described a boy who grew inwardly bitter, prone to sudden rages, as if something inside him had fractured and never properly healed. He was born with a club foot, a condition that might have limited another man, but Allison refused to be defined by it. He worked the fields, rode horses, and learned to handle firearms as well as any able-bodied youth. But alongside that, toughness grew volatility. Neighbors remembered a young man whose temper could ignite without warning, whose mood shifted sharply, and whose anger often seemed disproportionate to whatever slight provoked it. When the Civil War broke out, Allison enlisted with the Confederacy. War gave structure to his aggression, but it also amplified his instability. He clashed with officers, threatened superiors, and was eventually discharged after military doctors declared him partially epileptic and partially manic, prone to violent episodes under stress. The Army judged him unfit for service. Allison disagreed. He re-enlisted the following year, this time riding with Nathan Bedford Forrest, whose brutal, fast-moving style of warfare suited Allison perfectly. He served as a scout and irregular fighter, operating in the gray zones of the conflict where conventional rules rarely applied. By the war's end, Allison had been captured, sentenced to death as a spy, and escaped by killing a guard. He surrendered shortly after and was paroled, returning home alive but deeply altered. Peace did not soften him. Reconstruction-era. Tennessee was filled with resentment, displacement, and unresolved violence. Allison carried all of it. Stories soon followed him, some verifiable, others likely exaggerated, of confrontations with Union soldiers, of deadly disputes over property, of a man who answered insult with gunfire. Whether every detail was true mattered less than the reputation that formed around him. By the mid-1860s, Tennessee could no longer contain Clay Allison. He gathered his family and headed west into Texas, toward a frontier that offered both opportunity and anonymity. Even on the journey, violence followed him. He nearly beat a ferry operator to death over a fee dispute, an act that would echo years later when relatives of that man came looking for revenge. Texas suited him. He became a cowboy, then a cattle driver, riding the open range where law was thin and reputation mattered more than paperwork. He worked alongside some of the most famous cattlemen of the era and learned quickly how power operated in frontier spaces. But just as quickly, he earned a name as a dangerous man to cross. Disputes escalated rapidly around him, sometimes to the brink of death. In New Mexico, Allison's life took a darker turn. He acquired land, ran cattle, and for a time appeared to be settling into something resembling stability. But saloons, alcohol, and violence remained constants. One incident in particular cemented his reputation as a vigilante. When evidence surfaced that a local man had murdered travelers and even his own child, Allison led a mob that dragged the suspect from jail and executed him. Some accounts claim Allison went further, displaying the severed head as a warning. Whether fully accurate or not, the story spread rapidly, reinforcing the idea that Clay Allison did not wait for courts to deliver justice. By the early 1870s, his name was synonymous with both fear and authority. He was not a lawman, but in certain towns, his presence functioned like one. He drank heavily, threatened openly, and enforced his own sense of order with a gun. Yet even men like Allison were not immune to personal attachment. He married Dora McCullough, and for a brief window, it seemed as though marriage might anchor him. That illusion shattered when old grudges resurfaced. In 1874, Allison crossed paths with a professional gunman who carried a personal vendetta against him. The two men shared a meal before settling the matter, a strange mixture of courtesy and fatalism. When the shooting came, it was swift. Allison fired once, killing his rival instantly. Asked later why he had agreed to dine with a man he knew intended to kill him, Allison replied that he didn't want to send a man to hell on an empty stomach. If you had to choose right now, do you see that moment as cold-blooded murder or as the grim code of the frontier at work? Drop your answer in the comments. I read them all, and this question always divides people. That killing pushed Allison deeper into legend, but it also pulled him into a larger conflict that would define the rest of his life. Northern New Mexico was tearing itself apart over land. Powerful interests backed by lawyers, politicians, and money-claimed ownership over enormous tracts that settlers had occupied for years. Courts favored wealth, settlers favored rifles. Violence followed naturally. Allison emerged as one of the most feared enforcers in the struggle. He aligned himself with the settlers, patrolling towns, intimidating opponents, and making it clear that legal paperwork meant little when weighed against frontier muscle. When a minister who supported the settlers was murdered, Allison's campaign turned openly brutal. Suspects were hanged. Confessions were beaten out of prisoners. Mob justice replaced law entirely. Town officials who opposed him fled. Newspapers that criticized him were destroyed. Governors quietly discussed ways to eliminate him, even encouraging ambushes under the guise of negotiation. Allison survived all of it, sometimes by force, sometimes by sheer reputation. Soldiers sent to arrest him hesitated, knowing how easily the situation could explode. By the late 1870s, however, the tide was turning. The frontier was hardening into something more structured. Railroads were coming, courts were gaining teeth. Men like Clay Allison were becoming liabilities rather than assets. He drifted again, through Colorado and Kansas, brushing against other legends of the West. Stories later claimed showdowns with famous lawmen, but contemporary accounts suggest those moments ended without bloodshed, diffused by cooler heads who understood what violence would cost. Eventually, Allison returned to Texas. He registered cattle brands, managed ranches, and tried, at least on the surface, to live a quieter life. But even then, he remained unpredictable. He rode through towns naked except for his gun belt. He humiliated sheriffs. He staged public displays meant to remind everyone that he was not a man to be taken lightly. In his final years, something resembling peace settled in. He had children. He drank less. Neighbors described him as serious, hardworking, and even respectable. The man who had ruled towns through fear now signed petitions and discussed local governance. It seemed improbable, but Clay Allison appeared to be aging out of violence. His death, when it came, was absurdly ordinary. No gunfight, no ambush, a wagon accident. He fell beneath the wheels and was killed instantly. The man who had survived war, duels, mobs, and conspiracies died alone in the dust, crushed by his own freight. He was 47 years old. After his death, stories multiplied. Some painted him as a reformed family man undone by chance. Others remembered only the blood. The truth, as always, sat uneasily in between. Clay Allison was not a hero, but he was not simply a monster either. He was a product of a violent age shaped by loss, war, and a frontier that rewarded ruthlessness and punished restraint. His life exposes the lie at the heart of so many Western myths. Order did not tame the frontier through courage alone. It arrived slowly, unevenly, and often over the bodies of men like Clay Allison, men who thrived in chaos but could not survive the world that followed. If this story made you uncomfortable, good. That discomfort is where real history lives. Subscribe to Echoing Westwinds if you want more stories that refuse to simplify the past, and leave a comment telling me whether you think Clay Allison was a villain, a vigilante, or something far more complicated?